Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I am your host today. I'm also the creator and the moderator of TheChocolateLife.com. Before we get to our guest today, Leila Carvajal of Cocoa Supply, what I'd like to do is I'd like to mention to everybody to go into the comments. Let us know where in the world you are connecting from. We'll get a shout out on the screen for each one of you. And then if you have questions of either me or Leila during the course of the hour, please also throw them into the comments and we'll get your questions asked and answered. And with that, I want to welcome Leila today. How are you?
Hi, how are you, Clay? Nice being here. Thank you for having me.
You know, it's a real pleasure. I'm looking, I've been in your offices a couple of times and I'm looking at this, and this doesn't remind me of anything that I'm used to seeing. What's going on in Industry City this weekend?
I was displaced because we're doing an exhibit. We have what we call the open studios. So all the traffic, normally the foot traffic that they have below with bars, restaurants, and so on, are able to come up to the different warehouses and workshops that are here. And so we decided to do a cocoa exhibit to teach basically the public more about why craft chocolate, why it's important that what the difference in prices, what they're putting in, the whole value chain of the cocoa supply. And also making sure that, the people, again, we educate them to get more public for it.
Right. Well, I also know from my experience there that when you walk into your part of the studio at Industry City, you can smell some of the chocolate there, and that smell doesn't make it down to the ground floor. And so people will go,
exactly. We're going to have that. That's why we actually kept some of the pallets here and everything, because the warehouse definitely smells like chocolate. And we want to make sure, again, that everyone that comes here is general public. So that's something that we like. Right. It's a bunch of people from Brooklyn, general public, children, but also couples, younger crowd, older crowd. So they're going to come here, go in, out, and we're going to have an exhibit first showing them how craft chocolate is made. And second, why sustainability, that there's still child slavery in the world and so on. So I hope we get a lot of, new believers that the industry needs to move more towards craft.
Absolutely. So I just want to remind everybody that today's topic is Ecuadorian cacao. So as I pointed out in my post on The Chocolate Life, when people think about Ecuador, there are two things that they know. They know maybe Arriba Nacional and CCN-51, and that's it. They might recognize a name like Esmeraldas as a part of the country that cocoa comes from, but it turns out that's a fairly unsophisticated it's an unsophisticated understanding. And what we want to do is we want to understand, Ecuador and the cacao from Ecuador a little bit better today. Before we jump into that, what I want to do is I want to welcome Mark and Yuri from Blue Spruce Chocolates in Kittredge, Colorado. Hey guys, thank you very, very much for joining us today. And please, if you have questions for Leila, jump them in the comments and we will make sure to get them answered. So Leila, let's start off with a map of Ecuador. And just so that everybody knows, what I will do is I will put this map into the post on The Chocolate Life, so you don't have to worry too much about following along closely. I understand that the map is a little difficult to read. But let's talk first of all about Guayaquil and the Guayas River and what, Arriba and Arriba Nacional are. So seeing the map here, let me get it a little better situated. There we go. All right, so please, Arriba Nacional, that history, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go to a part of the country, and a part of Ecuador, and this is where your family involvement in cacao begins. So, locate us on the map and help us understand what's going on here.
Well, in the 1900s, beginning of the 1900s, Ecuador had a boom of cocoa. It was like the Gran Cacao. Everything was normally shipped from the different from the rivers to the port of Guayaquil that was exported. And then they had different nacional, actually means national. So even in that time, they were coming from different regions, and they were it was known as Cacao Nacional. It was already known in Europe as a fine cocoa, an aromatic cocoa. But there was one area that people were like, "Oh, that's actually really good cocoa. Where does that come from?" And they were saying Rio Arriba, which means up the river. So if you go through the Guayas River and you go up, you go to the area of Vinces, of everywhere that's like Los Rios a little bit to the front, and that's where, where also Catarama is. And all that cocoa was actually shipped through little boats to the port of Guayaquil. So this is where the name Arriba Cacao, but it's also Nacional Cacao. As I said, it's part of the Nacional means national. It was every cocoa that came from Ecuador at that time to Europe. They came from different regions. But when people were asking, hey, where do I get that cocoa that's fruity, sweet, that you had last time, they said Rio Arriba. So that's where the name comes from. And it's more like a geographic a location of where it comes, where it's still a very it's still a cocoa producing region, so you still get it from there, which is different than Esmeraldas and so on. Each one was their particular cocos, but all of them under the shield of Nacional, if you wanna name it like that.
Okay, so my understanding, just to go back here, so arriba is just basically sort of slang that traders would come into the port of Guayaquil and they'd say, "Where's the good cocoa?" And they say, "Upriver, arriba, arriba, go upriver." And that's where the Arriba part of the name came from. So
Yeah.
Nacional is actually now recognized genetically as a distinct species,
Yes.
right?
At that point, we're talking in the 1900s again. It was
right, right.
And they were
But
all still related. Again, even at that point, it was the same. It was just, cocoa depends on the variety, but also on the soil and how the farm is treated. So it is also because of that the Arriba got a name. But at that point, genetically, it was mostly it was the same,
Right. And again, just to put things together, so Nacional is technically, I believe, a forastero, not a criollo.
Forastero, yes, which was,
Okay.
again, it's also an interesting name because forastero means foreigner. And it's interesting that we are actually the land of cocoa, and it was named after, those are the foreigners, but it was our cocoa, and it was at that point
Right. That's because the Spanish arrived in Mexico, and everything in Mexico was criollo because that means native from here, and everything that came from anywhere else was forastero or foreign. So just wanted to put something really, really quickly together. So this is the town of Vinces. You can see that there's a river here. It is in the province of Los Rios, the rivers, which is right next to Guayas, right, which is where Guayaquil is located. And so I just wanted to geographically sort of center things. Now, I understand that your family comes from a town which is pretty much due east of Vinces called Catarama, and I've got this image of your family. So, and this was taken in 1928, but there was a seminal event that happened much earlier. Can you let me know what happened? Is it your great-great-grandmother?
That is, I mean, the one that's in that picture is my great-grandfather, and that was actually his children. There should be also my grandfather. One of those children that was part of they were also working, in the town. But the family history started actually at the very beginning of Catarama. We know that there was actually an American agrometer. He did like the land measuring and everything, and they saw this beautiful place, and he fell in love, and he was like, "Oh, this is beautiful. If you guys, I'll make all the maps for free if you want to create here a little place, like a little town." So this was a guy that came with a guy called Bartolome Huerta. He's not part of my direct family, but we have a Huerta that is my great-great-grandfather, and he was part of that too. He's also Huerta. So they were Colombian, they came there and they settled. And we know that they established the first haciendas in the town, and was officially the town of Catarama. They had a child. My great-grandfather Huerta was his wife, and that was my great-grandmother Celsa, and she was only 16 years old when their parents died. And we don't know exactly how they passed away because there's not much record, but we know that at that point she inherited the land that was from the founders of Catarama. And from that point, she had to work with all the haciendas. So she 16 years old, she was a farmer's girl. So she farmed, she did everything. And later on also married, because a girl at that point, 16 years old, was not supposed to be alone. It was not well seen. So she married my great-grandfather, Adolfo Carvajal, and they continued. She was the one who was actually the farmer's girl. She was the one running the farms mostly, and he was better educated. He was actually more involved into the town, into creating more the town. They made it a canton, you know. So he went, and he was also the one who decided to send all the boys, again, different times, all the boys to the port of Guayaquil, because they wanted, he said they need to learn how, they need to go to school, they need to learn how to have some trade or something. They cannot stay here because they already had at that point the escoba de bruja, the picture what they said. So a lot of their, my family was never really involved in Gran Cacao as exporters. They were farmers. They were, again, there's a difference between a trade and the actual farmer. The traders, the exporters at that point already made a lot of money during Gran Cacao. The farmers, not so much. And when the escoba de bruja came, they lost almost everything in cocoa. They had some other fruits and so on, but they lost almost everything. So they sent the boys to Guayaquil. They were aged from 10 years old to 16, no, 7, I think, to 16. And one became a doctor, one became my grandfather became a civil engineer, the other one also became an engineer. So they all studied. They all made sure they had to fend for themselves. They had to. The oldest one didn't go to university because he had to basically help the younger ones, but he became a very good tradesman. So that's how the family actually was able to develop. It was really, you know, again, one of our missions is education. Because of that, we believe that without that sight, that vision of sending the boys or to study and to learn more, we would have eventually not been able to develop the way we did as a family. And the farms eventually got sold because they didn't have. I mean, they didn't really survive the calamity of the escoba de bruja, the witch's room.
The witch's room. So what I want to do now, Leila, is we have a couple of questions from the audience. The first thing I want to do is give a quick shout out to Lena Lukumi. Thank you very much. I know you're connecting from YouTube. I don't know where in the world you're connecting from. She's got this one comment. Wow, what a story to think deeper about women's participation in the cocoa value chain. Yes, it is something that is often very, very much overlooked. There is a modern sort of women in cocoa and chocolate called WINC, W-I-N-C-C. But we do need to be reminded often that women have always played a vital role on the farm in not only keeping the farm running, but keeping the families together. So really, really important. But Lena does have a question to ask, which is, who started to demand the cocoa beans Arriba del Rio? Chocolate makers in Europe, the exporters, the natives. So where did this demand come from originally?
It came from Europe. It was the Europeans that said, hey, from that export that I received from Guayaquil, that was good cocoa. Can you give me more of that? And then the buyers came and were like, hey, where did they come from? And it was like Rio Arriba. So it was already known as, if you wanted a good quality, go there, you know? Right. It is also a matter of, Ecuador has a very long tradition of cocoa farming. So the knowledge of the farmers of how to ferment and treat the plant is vital. So it's not only just, as I say, everything was nacional at that point. There were not so much the varieties. It was a lot to do also how it is treated. The soil, obviously, it was a perfect soil and land with the rain to have this great variety. But it also had to do with how the farmers treated. And again, we have, I think in Ecuador, any farmer that you go to knows at least a little bit about cocoa and how to ferment it. Each region and place does something different. But I do think that that's something that we have very much embedded compared to other countries where this crop is relatively new.
So I want to acknowledge that we have a couple of questions from Mark at Blue Spruce, and it's not the appropriate time for them. Mark, thanks for acknowledging. You know, when it's appropriate, we will get to them before the end of the hour. But now, what I would like to do, if I can, Leila, is go back to the map of Ecuador.
Sure.
Because what I want to show to people is, let's get back out a little bit. So here is all of Ecuador. Not quite all of Ecuador. It's a very long country. All right. So just to orient people again. So here we are. Your facilities are located down in Guayaquil. So that's where you are. Up here in the province of Pichincha is Quito. I was in Puerto Quito, which is about a 2-hour drive west of Quito. But when we think about an origin, all right, of Esmeraldas, so Esmeraldas is up here, right, near the border of Colombia, right? So that's a part of Manabí is down here, right, in this area here. But what I want to do now is I want to go into the deep past of cocoa in Ecuador. Down here we've got this
Palanda.
This place down here we can see. It's near the modern day border of Peru. So when I was in Guayaquil in October, I had a chance to sit in on a presentation with Dr. Francisco Valdez. And so Dr. Valdez has been sort of a lead researcher in understanding the history of cacao. What's really important about the Santa Ana, La Florida peoples, Palanda, and this part of Ecuador, which is the province of Zamora or Zamora Chinchipe.
Zamora Chinchipe, yeah.
Okay. So, and the Mayo Chinchipe peoples. I mean, there's lots of names to keep in mind, but I just want to go, let's go back as far as we can go to what it is that we know and we can prove archaeologically about the history of cacao in the world.
Yes. Well, it was, I think, discovered around the year 2000, a little bit later. 2000, they started excavations. A little bit later, they started to find the artifacts. They found for the first time, not for the first time, they found traces of cocoa in, how you say that, in little bowls, the ones that were for drinking. And then, well, they had it, of course, tested, DNA tested, everything in the lab. It was the first traces of cocoa used, domestically into food. And it was around the year 3500 AC. So it was the first ever recorded use. They had it carbon 14 tested and everything. And they were able to open up the field. So right now it's an archaeological field. They're learning more, still learning more and more of how it was used. But apparently it was used of their regular eating habits, but also in ceremonies for the dead. It was close to a ceremonial little site there. So they're still learning. They were also chewing coca. So it was like together with others, was not only cocoa. It was part of their diet. And then apparently it was somehow the culture moved more towards south and then to Peru. And then eventually there was a trade that ended up somehow in Mexico. But it was the first recorded use of cocoa in the world. So, and it was DNA wise and from the plants and everything, we know now that at least from all the records we have, this would be the origin of the cocoa tree or cocoa use in dietary lives.
So my understanding is that the work that Dr. Valdez and his teams are doing, they've established the first use and domestication of cacao.
Yes.
At about 5,500 years BP, before the present. So roughly 3,500 BCE. And so I think that one of the things that I also learned is that at least Dr. Valdez believes that they're going to be able to push this back another 2,000 years.
I do think so too. This is the first time they're knowing about it. So right now comes the second part, being like, okay, we found this. Now we have to dig deeper into what other cultures were there previous of that one and find it. But right now they have a trace. So they got the first lead. I do believe that it's gonna come into further development for sure.
Right. And I want to be very, very careful to distinguish. What we've done here is we've said this is the first use and domestication of cacao. We don't actually know what the center of origin of cacao is yet.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So and when we talk about Ecuador and Peru, obviously we're talking modern day borders.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
So there was
exactly. We have at that point those countries didn't even exist.
Right, and there has been a war in your memory and my memory where this border here, right, was redrawn. So this right here, this is the border between Ecuador and Peru. This border is here now, but 50 years ago it was in a different place.
It was Ecuador and Peru, and Ecuador and Brazil actually used to touch each other. They had a common border at the middle of the Amazon. We lost that. It was, I think, a 30 or 40-year war with Peru, and we eventually lost that war. So it was redrawn. A lot of our Amazonian basin was taken, by the when they withdrew that order. Uh, but that is still, the Zamora Chinchipe is still very much, it's part of Ecuador right now. It's part of the limits. It's a little bit south of Loja, so that's a very, it's something that, as Ecuadorians, that's a region that I've been a few times. It's not completely out of reach.
Right. So, what I do want to say again, just to let people know, it's part of the presentation that Dr. Valdez was giving, is it's not obvious from what it is that we're looking here on the map, but there's actually a lowland dip in the Andes between here and Machala, between where Palanda is here, right, and where Machala is up here. And one of the things they found, which really surprised the researchers, is they found shells from the Pacific Ocean in the Palanda area, which is just like remarkable to me, right? But they also theorize that this would have been the route by which cacao made its way from this deep in the Andes and in the Amazon River basin off to the coast. And from the coast, it would have gone to other parts of the country. Yeah, because right here is Peru. Right. Yeah. So, right here is Peru. For people who are not aware, we have the area which is called Piura is here. Right. So Tumbes is a deep water port right there, which is where a lot of stuff coming out of northern Peru makes it to market. So these is the modern, I'm just trying to situate things in a modern day. Right. But realize that we're talking, every 2.5 centimeters here, right, is a long distance. And when you don't have cars and you're carrying things, or you've got pack animals, it's a long way to get from to here and there. I think it's really, really important to know this sort of this history and the sort of the geography, and to understand. So people may know where Cuenca is. So I'm situating Cuenca. We're here on my first trip to Ecuador in 2003. We flew into Quito, but then we flew into this little town here called Coca, right? Coca. And then I got onto a canoe along the Napo River, and where we went was between here Limoncocha, right, and I believe Providencia.
Okay.
So here's where we are along the Rio Napo, and you just for anybody who's never been to Origin, like you fly to someplace, and then you get on a small plane and you fly to someplace, and then you get a much smaller bit of conveyance, and then you continue, and so it's like it's like in the end. And I think people, we had that sort of sense when we were talking about Bolivia last week. When I first went and saw Volker, I flew into La Paz, then to Santa Cruz, then overnight bus to Trinidad, then a small airplane to Baures, and then it was just like you keep on going and you keep on going and you keep on going until you get there. What I want to do now is sort of, if I can, Leila, before we do this, number one, I want to give a quick shout out to Shirley Lum, who's connecting from Toronto. Hey, Shirley, hope things are in Toronto are good today. Mike King at Encore Coffee Company in Kansas City has also got a shout out today. So thanks everybody for joining. If you're in the comments, if you're watching today, throw your name in the comments. Let me know where in the world you're connecting from. We'll get it up on, and if you have a question for Leila or for me, please do it. And while you're thinking about it, like, comment, subscribe, share, let people know, share the love. This part of the history just is completely fascinating for me. When I went to Ecuador, both in 2003 and 2005 for the first times, one of the things that we did is we went to the market of Otavalo, which is up here outside of Quito. And I was looking for any indication of cocoa in the, was it on pottery? Was it in the textiles or anything like that? And it turns out that it's an entirely different relationship. You go next door to Peru and you see or you go to Mexico, it's embedded in the visual iconography of everything right from the farm. And in Ecuador, it's missing, which I think is really, really interesting.
We are to use, it's interesting. For us, it was so common to have cocoa that it became so normal that it's still taking us a while to showcase it. It's a weird thing, you know. Where when people come and they're like, for me, it was even coming, and I'm a little bit more international. My mom was German and so on. But for me, even when people didn't know, I'm already 50, growing up, what cocoa came from, it was a little bit like, you know, it was like, what? You know, this is so normal. It's like telling you,
Right.
hey, you don't know an orange? You're like, what? An orange? Who doesn't know an orange? That's a little bit how it is. And I think that's a little bit what we have had in as Ecuadorians, the difficulty now that origins became more important than in the time of the Gran Cacao and so on. Then people just wanted cocoa, and in the middle you have a history where the traders didn't even want you to care about origin, because it's much easier to trade it as a commodity, where if it doesn't matter if it comes from Africa or that, whoever gets the best price wins, you know. So we're finally the phase where you're like, whew, now people actually care about origin, and we're like, we already were the first exporters. It became really strange for us. So
Gotcha.
I think we're still not doing a great job with it, but but it's getting there.
Right. So I just wanted to jump again. A quick shout out to Juan Gonzalez from Mabco in Toronto. Juan, it's good to hear from you today, and from Kurt Keisler in Charleston, South Carolina. Thanks for letting us know where you're connecting today. So I want to also, if I can, before getting to the next point, locate in history. So Ecuador is an important exporter throughout, you know, throughout the 1800s, and into the early 1900s. What we find is that the largest exporter in the world, right at the turn of the century, is Sao Tome and Principe, right?
Yes.
But then the Cadburys said, you know, slavery, so we're going to stop producing, and so they moved to Ghana. But it's at that point where Ecuador became the largest exporter in the world,
Yes.
right? In that early part of the
The
1900s, right? But that sort of ascendancy, right, didn't last very long, because
No.
there was the introduction of witch's broom, escoba de bruja, as you say, and then production went, you know,
When,
cratered, right?
yes.
I understand that at the same time there was also a change of government and some agrarian land reform, and so the
Yes.
big haciendas got broken up,
They
right?
get,
And
yes.
they
Exactly.
took, you know, people from the city and sent them out to become farmers, and that was a disaster in terms of the history of everything.
Yes, yes. I mean, you have a combination of things. It was definitely the politics, but it was also the witch's broom, which took a while to recover for Ecuadorian farmers. So it was not something that they were able to quickly bounce back. And that's a little bit what the problem is. I think we lost Clay, so we're just gonna continue with
No, I'm
there.
here.
Okay,
I
so
I just needed to powder my nose,
oh, okay, so
and
so
I didn't want it to be on camera, so it's all right. I'm here. I'm just giving it to you. All right.
So perfect. As I say, it was a combination of things. It was the witch's broom, which, there's a lot of theories that it was brought in because it was the highest producing country, and it really devastated the crops. And then you also had a lot of, in the farms, a lot of unhappy people because of that. It was like, you have the bigger haciendas, and you had suddenly a disaster, the wages were not paid, and so on. So the government started to look for a way of making up for it, or creating a different policy to to get again people back to farming, and not getting them all back to the cities where they were fleeing to. So as I say, one drove the other one, terrible politics in betweens, but it was made because of a reason.
Understand, but again, you know, the thing that I was told when I was there
Mhm.
is that the hacienda system that existed in the late 1800s and the early 1900s was actually incredibly efficient in terms
Yes.
of getting the cocoa from the farm to the port.
Yeah.
And one of the things that this movement in the after the end of the Gran Cacao,
Mhm.
right, um, actually broke up that system entirely. And so we now have we still have the remnants of that system, where you have the farmer who's selling to a coyote, and that coyote may be selling to some other middleman who's got a little centro de copio in the local town, who's then selling to another middleman. And so
Yes.
when we talk about things like sustainability and traceability, you have this huge historical roadblock that
Yes.
needs to be overcome, because you're now threatening people's livelihoods and the way they're
Yes.
doing things.
Yes. I do agree with that. And I think that, but I do think that nowadays with technology, we are having a new step into something different. So it is still, it's true what you said. After the haciendas crumbled because of witches' broom and the Reforma Agraria, we ended up having also a lot of not really well seasoned or farmers, or let's use like new farmers or new administrators. So that was also difficulty to bring again the cocoa. You created this intermediary system because they didn't know how to do it, and they needed someone to do the logistics for them. However, I do think that nowadays with WhatsApp, with everyone has a mobile phone from every person and so on, it's slowly starting to become different. It's starting to be like we can easily reach right now our farmers with a WhatsApp, tell them, hey, do you have cocoa? Is it dry? Is it this? It's like, who? Maybe give me 2 more days. Fine. It has enhanced it a lot. So I think that we're moving into the right direction where all those intermediaries are going to have a tough time, because right now the access is again much easier than before. When we're talking about 20 years ago, right now every farmer does have a little bit of a connection or can have the connection to at least the exporters or the factories or so on, to have their cocoa translated directly without the intermediaries. The logistics is still there. You still need, if you're only going to transport a small amount compared to a bigger one, you might want to bundle it up together. So there's still room for some intermediaries to make volume. And that's a little bit why we go into smaller batches, because we want to make sure that we are not forced because of volume to give all the, the margins and everything to the intermediary without going to the farmer. So I do think it's a matter of volume, how fast you want it, but I do think that the access nowadays is available. And I think that's a great thing.
So let's talk, if we can, about volume then.
Yes.
I mean, so we have, even, at the turn of the century, the 1800s and the 1900s, Ecuador is very shortly to become the largest exporter in the world. We're still talking a relatively small amount of cocoa. Yes. Right. And then after witch's broom was introduced, there's this whole effort that's being done to try to find varieties which are resistant. And in the 1960s, the modern day boom of not just Ecuadorian cocoa, but also Peruvian cocoa was created, in near Guayaquil. I believe it's around in Naranjal. But can you tell us about what everybody's bugaboo in the quote unquote fine flavor chocolate, Cacao Finos Ecuatoriana, this bugaboo called CCN-51?
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
CCN-51.
It was in the beginning of the 70s, end of 60s, that Homero Castro, he was experimenting with different type of clones, breeding. So it's not a GMO or anything like that. It's basically like breeding, like you do breed a dog. And he was trying to see different plants because we had the history of the witch's broom, which basically devastated the Ecuadorian economy. So he started creating like different crosses between different plants that were more resistant. And it was funny. I was still a little girl. My dad taught. We went once to him, and he was showing us. It was all in plastic. It was not like a gigantic research place. It was actually more like a small little hacienda with a bunch of little plants in plastic cups and plastic bottles from soda. And he was explaining to us that the idea was to create something that was more resistant. So eventually he was able to create the breed called CCN-51, which is a Castro, something.
Colección Castro Naranjal.
Right. 51 was the variety, the 51st variety, the number that he had written one. That was used at the very beginning. It was, everyone was excited. It was a variety that was a much smaller plant, much more productive than the Arriba Nacional or the Nacional. Higher fat content, which is also great because the Nacional has the tendency to have a lower fat content, and you need to add the cocoa butter, which is the most expensive part of the bean. And so the problem was the first was the excitement. So the bigger farms, or the people that were new into farming and wanted to create bigger cocoa farms, were like, oh, now that would make a good business. So they planted the CCN-51. But first of all, it was large haciendas where they were trying to implement the fermentation that they were used for centuries, for a century from the Nacional. And as we now know, each variety needs their own time, needs their own treatment, needs their own type of post-harvest treatment. And so at the beginning, it was a very acidic bean. The flavor was not great. It didn't ferment as fast as the Nacional. So you had an issue where beans were basically sold unfermented, and an unfermented bean just tastes horrible. So it created this bad reputation for CCN-51. And I do think that it was merely because it was introduced without really the proper post-harvest knowledge of how to treat the bean and how to ferment it, how many days it needs to ferment, and how to treat also the acidity, Nowadays, you have already haciendas that have developed amazing post-fermentation treatments, like San Jose is one of them, and they have actually even won awards because it's a great bean, It is, again,
at the Cacao of Excellence, I believe.
Yeah, and it has a different flavor profile. There's nothing, you cannot compare apples to pears, but it is a bean that's very much has its own category. Good flavor. Some people, we have seen that some people, when they prefer more acid bean, they tend to go to the CCN, a well-fermented CCN wins in that case. It is, so we have seen that in the last years, that has changed the quality of the CCN-51s of certain. You still have the people that want to, again, some farmers, they just want to have a quick turnaround and then they don't ferment it when the CCN-51 needs more time fermenting. That means more capital tied, you have your cocoa sitting there in your fermentation boxes or piled up, and that means that you don't get it that quickly. So that's a little bit the downside of it, that if someone really wants the cashier to move it fast, then you might have the problem that you're going to get unfermented CCN-51. But the bean itself nowadays has already, I think anyone that has been seen the trajectory has to agree that it is right now a good bean. It's not, different, but not bad at all, and with advantages.
So certainly, I mean, 20 years ago, there were, if somebody were to hand you a bar made with CCN-51, you'd be able to tell immediately. And I was in Puerto Quito just in last October, and somebody handed me a bar, and I tasted it, and I said, this has got to be CCN-51, just because it was. I could tell from the flavor profile. Yeah, the beans are much larger than the Nacional variety is, number one. So it does take longer for the chemical transformations to penetrate to the center of the bean.
It has less polyphenols too. It is less, it doesn't have, so that makes also the oxidation slower. So there are reasons why it is like that. It has also more fat. Creates also a barrier. So you have the advantages at the same time and disadvantage. So you have different reasons of why it needs a different treatment. But I agree with you. Again, the biggest concern is the fermentation with them.
Right. And what's really interesting is that most people don't know that one of the three parents in CCN-51 is Nacional.
Yes.
Right? There is this fine flavor cocoa bean heritage. And we'll get to that in a little again, because there's some exciting news about the future of cocoa coming out. Kurt is saying the Hacienda San Jose bean is really wonderful. He gets wonderful honey and nut tastes from it. Yeah, I think what's really interesting is that a properly fermented bean, that CCN-51 that is dried, 20 years ago, if you did a blind taste test, you go, I can tell immediately this is CCN-51. These days, if you're doing a blind taste test, it's almost impossible to tell. I mean, if somebody has done a good job of fermentation. And just in case people want to know, is that if you're a big fan of Barry Callebaut's Ruby chocolate, it is almost entirely CCN-51. That's what they're making. That's what they're using. And also, I was in Venice last October as well, where Callebaut did their introduction of second generation chocolate, and it's all CCN-51. And it's all being harvested, at least at the time, off their experimental farm in Guayas and the Factory of the Future, which is not far from Progreso, which is where we're going to go really, really quickly when we go and talk about that. So there's a sense in which, even though CCN-51 was demonized from the beginning, it wasn't a fine flavor cocoa, but it
Yeah,
represented the foundation of the modern Ecuadorian cocoa economy. Without CCN-51, the story of cocoa in Ecuador would be entirely different, right? And
absolutely.
the way we think about cacao fino, because we needed demons. So the craft chocolate movement, if we start off, needed demons. Big chocolate bad, right? Craft
Mhm.
chocolate good,
Yeah,
CCN-51 bad, Nacional good, right? So it's important also in framing the current day, really,
absolutely.
really in those terms. So number one, so Kurt, you've got a question here. What other experiments are going on? Are they continuing to experiment? The answer is absolutely there are, and we're going to get to that right next. Lila, this next one from Carlos
Mhm.
is en español. So saludos y felicitaciones por
Felicitaciones.
tan buena. So greetings and thank you very much for this good presentation. It
From
appears
Guadarrama.
he is from Catarama, Provincia de los Ríos, Hacienda La
La Esperanza. Tierra de cacao fino de
All right,
fino.
home of
Saludos.
the cacao.
Está bien.
Anyway, thank you very much for connecting with us today. So what I want to do is, before we jump into experiments, because we've only got 20 minutes left in the hour, right? I want to be respectful of your time. It's been, as I had hoped, we would have this wonderful conversation.
Sure.
Let's go back, if we can, very, very quickly, to Palanda, right? And
Yes.
you have a very, very specific response. There are many people in this area who are saying we can um, do some traceability and some sustainability and guarantee that in the Amazon, right? And you have some very, very specific responses
Yes.
to that proposition in this specific area, right? So and I think it goes counter to what a lot of people think of, and so I
Yeah.
wanted to give you time to go and talk about that current situation and where you sit.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing some people promoting Amazonian cocoa, and Amazonian not as a variety, because there are varieties that are from, we're not talking genetically a variety that is Amazonian. We're talking about being farmed in the Amazon. And I'm, again, probably not very popular with some people, but I don't think the idea of harvesting or farming the Amazon is actually a great idea. I do think it will create more deforestation. They say that, oh, we can make it, with satellite, we'll make sure that the pictures of the farm that they have not grown. But if it is a profitable business, if it is something that will generate more income, they're not going to use that farm and increase it. They're going to deforest other places around the farm that are not monitored by satellite, and just bring it in, and you will see very high yields of a cocoa farm that normally would need a lot of a much higher technology, and you realize that there is no deforestation. So for me, I try to tell everyone the Amazon, that's the one place that should be sacred. It's not like other rainforest. So if you do agroforestry or farming in other rainforests, there might be a way. Each ecosystem has their own way of doing possibilities. But in the case of the Amazon, the soil is actually the richness or the humus of the soil is only an inch deep. It's one of this. It's very
Right.
shallow, and it's
Mhm.
mostly clay and sand. So if you take away the biomass that grows above, and those are very tall trees, and they're very intertwined. There's like every inch is covered by green. So a farm is not. You need, a meter and a half, 2 meters between tree and tree. And additionally, you also affect all the fauna. You will not have the same animals cropping there. So farming the Amazon, in my opinion, is the
Right.
biggest mistake, knowing that we have so much land that is already traditionally a cocoa land or cocoa farming on the other side of the Andes. On the other side of the Andes, we're working right now with a foundation, which is Maquipucuna, which is close to Quito. It's a little bit lower, and it has a cloud forest. And part of that, what they did, this foundation, is purchase the cloud forest so that it cannot be deforested more. And there were areas that were already deforested. What they're doing is they're planting cacao. It is high altitude, so it's a little bit of an experimental too. They're between 1,500, 1,700 meters. So they're doing coffee and cocoa, but that's the second best. That's already a place that was already damaged, was already turned down. And then that is a completely different, and then you have communities. So my opinion is, when I see right now the rainforest and I go to visit, compared to what I saw when I was a little kid, it's already so damaged. It's already, the towns are bigger. They're like almost cities. We never had that before, and it hurts. So I do believe that we need to try to make a negative migration to the rainforest. We want to keep it out. We want to, of course, the community is there. As a human being, I don't wish anyone to not be able to survive. So if they can do ecotourism, or they can do like the archaeological side, or what we do in Galapagos, we have a very contained tourism where there's a limited amount of people that can go, that can have time and so on. The prices are higher. The Galapagos works very well like that, and you maintain the ecosystem. But my opinion is it should not.
Well, so I want to point out there's a difference between farming and wild harvesting.
Absolutely.
So I just want to so farming the Amazon is a bad idea.
Yes.
What you're doing is wild harvesting is very, very
different.
Wild
harvesting is actually one thing that they could do between. There's actually not much cocoa naturally in the Amazon itself, but there's some. But there's also the Tebroma bicolores, which is the paxate. So you have different things that you can create a community of wild harvesting in moderation each areas, so that they have a sustainable, livelihood. But the farming itself, keep it out, because you're just, even if you say that you're monitoring this plot of land, you will not be able to monitor the rest where it's going to come as an influx. So it doesn't make sense.
So really, really quick, I just wanted to make that point, because many people think that it is possible to quote unquote exploit the Amazon.
No, it's very romantic to have beans from the jungle. Yeah. And again, unless they're wild harvested and you're willing to pay the price for wild harvesting, which is a different one than farming, otherwise it's really just romanticism, and you're doing a damage.
Okay, so I want to go in really, really quickly and go back to Carlos, who's saying the Hacienda Esperanza, which is where he is, está al lado, is near. Está al lado, the Hacienda San Jose. So very, very close. Okay. So I would say mi español está mejorando, but it has been improving, the mejorando, for many, many years. Right? I've been working. The main thing that has improved is my ability to pronounce the phrase mi español está mejorando. I want to go back to Juan Gonzalez, who says he likes to know the fermentation protocol is better for CCN-51. He's going to be in Ecuador next month trying to get good cocoa beans. So saludos to Ecuador. So that's really, really, really important. So now I want to go and do something a little bit different if I can, because what I want to do is I want to show a picture of what a dry forest looks like. So, Leila, when I was there in October, we went and spent an afternoon. We went to a place called Hacienda del Alto, I believe is the name of this place. Right. It's about 2 hours southwest towards Progreso out of Guayaquil, still in Guayas. And the history of the dry forest is really, really quite remarkable. This used to be just like this old forest with towering trees, but the trees happened to be of this specific variety that made them useful for building boats. Yes. And so basically this entire part of the country was clear cut to make boats and actually to rebuild Guayaquil after a fire. Right. Mm-hmm. But a bunch of years ago, there was a hydroelectric project called Daule, which now provides most of the electricity for the country of Ecuador. But they built an irrigation system into the dry forest of Guayas, which covers around 70,000 hectares. And so in this picture, right, if people look at the tall trees that are in the back of this picture here, there is cacao growing here. And I think if any of us have been to a cacao farm anywhere in the world, if you said we're about to walk into a cacao farm, they'd go, I don't believe you. Right at all. And here's where we are. That's cacao growing under these trees, which is just, really, really quite remarkable. It's all irrigated, right? It's all drip irrigated. but the hacienda. I'm mentioning this because this is a farm that you work with, and
Yes.
this is also the photo which is from the featured image on this post is
Yeah.
from this same farm. So you actually
Yes.
get into the cacao, and this looks more like a traditional cacao
Really.
farm,
Yes.
right? But how, what is the tension? Number one, what do people think about growing cacao in a dry forest?
Well,
Can we do it? And then, what are sort of the implications of using this land, which doesn't have much use otherwise?
no. One of the things that from Santa Elena province, or and that part of Guayas, between Guayas and Santa Elena province, they were at the beginning one. So that province was, as you said, deforested long, long time ago for the use of wood, and it was really dry. It was almost forest-like. It was sandy. It was very the heat and the sun is incredible during the noon, and there was no use for it. Then Daula Peripa came, the hydroelectric, and they did the irrigation. They also sent it to Santa Elena, and now we're seeing more and more not only reforestation, like in this case of a dry forest, but also farms with cocoa. We even have some wine, some grape farms, and so on in there. And what you're seeing is suddenly this whole area starting to bloom, which is a fantastic feeling. Again, going back to instead of going to the Amazon, why don't you do things like that, which brings a lot more into the ecosystem. And you're seeing again because of that, because it's those dry forests, they were also used at some point as pasture land and so on. So they were really run down. Some of them were used as chicken farms, so they're also run down for that one. So you have right now this, and I would say it's most of the time people that want haciendas, but are also very conscious that they want to do something back for the land. So even when you see Hacienda del Alto, it's a hacienda that is more like an ideological project
Mm-hmm.
than actually something that is going to give them enormous amount of profits. But you can combine it. There's always a chance. We always say, like what we're doing with Makipukuna, you do the ecological part and you look for the sustainability of it. And that's the whole point of having sustainability, is making it feasible for next generations to continue without depleting it. So in this case, this is a prime example of what you can do. And each one, we have found different projects, each one doing it a little bit their way. They basically had this dry forest and they had a channel of water running there where they can get the irrigation. So you see those plots at the beginning of the picture, it's still very dry. And then suddenly you have like those little oases with cocoa and gigantic trees. And that's the beauty of what we're seeing in this part of the region. Um, what we do, I mean, the idea of generally what we do or what we try to promote is always special projects. I always say there's not one size fits all. Each
Mm-hmm.
region has their own way of doing it. And each region has to find a way of making it sustainable so that it is, it's self-sustaining. Um, in the case of Santa Elena, we have also seen people that one of the trees that is native from there is the sabos tree. It's a gigantic tree. It looks a little bit like a baobab. And that one is, from what the farmers have told me, are the ones that create the water channels between the haciendas. So
Mm-hmm.
you already see a lot of those new farmers, or the ones that are regenerating the farms in Santa Elena, being very careful to keep those trees. They're
Mm-hmm.
learning a new ecosystem that is not from the area of where we normally traditionally have cacao, which is in Los Rios, El Oro, Guayas, a little bit Santo Domingo. This is going, or Esmeraldas, this is going into an area that is completely new for farming.
Right.
And it's actually great to see what they're doing and how they're
Yeah.
doing it. And you see big haciendas also. You saw Victoria, you saw they're
Yeah.
going into this new untapped land,
Mm-hmm.
and it's becoming green. And the beauty of it also is because it is a land that started from dry, there is an advantage. The advantage is it doesn't have all the molds and inherited diseases that the inner land has. So we do see a big future into those areas as opposed to say ecologically fragile areas.
So we're getting towards the end. And so I wanted to say, Carlos, thank you very much for good pronunciation in Spanish. I try, I do my best. Certainly, I think my pronunciation is better than my vocabulary. I want to jump real quickly on and go back to Kurt's question.
Sure.
And Mark, if you're still here, we'll get to your questions, but it may be just slightly after the hour. So what
Yes.
other experiments are going on in Ecuador, and are they continuing to
Yes.
experiment? And so, number one, I wanted to talk about the work that's being done in the dry forest from my experience, which is there is this Hacienda Victoria, and one of the things they're doing is they're doing open sun, high intensity farming of Cacao Nacional and other varieties that are considered to be very, very low productivity. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're getting 2 metric tons per hectare out of Nacional using very, very interesting planting designs. So it's not 3x3, 1100, 3x3 meters with 1100 trees per hectare, which is fairly common. Just very, very different planting designs. But they're also being very careful about the science, about how they water, how much water they're using, what kinds of nutrients they're putting into the water, and things like that. And what they've proven to me and to other people is that you can do high intensity open sun farming that is in fact carbon neutral. So they've been certified as the first carbon neutral cocoa farm in the world, and can also qualify as regenerative, right, by the people who are at the heads of the regenerative agriculture. And so I think that from an experimentation point of view, that's just really, really remarkable. One of the things I know they're also doing is, can we remove cadmium during fermentation, which is also something that.
Yeah, I actually was talking to INEAP a lot, because they do a lot of, Ecuador has a very good experimental science station that has been working with cocoa since the 1950s. After Escoba de Bruja, the first thing they thought is, we need to get into this. And it was, so they're developing also different type of breeds that are not only more resistant, but also they're going into the cadmium. They're tackling down cadmium. So some of their newer ones already have a less cadmium absorption, which is fantastic news for the farm. So a lot of people want always the old, and they're, it's again, the romanticism of the old is the best.
Yes.
But I have to say, in this case, is where you're using the old genetics, that means you have still the old breeds that have already a flavor profile and so on, and you look for newer breeds that have less cadmium absorption, do have some advantages of productivity and so on, then I do believe that the future is to try to find those new breeds and not just stick to, we want the cacao plant, the very old ones, they're really tall. You try to harvest that is not easy. So I do think that there's a good, and we need.
I also want to point out that when we think about CCN-51, the primary impetus in CCN-51 is disease resistant, and they didn't think about flavor. Right, but Nacional is in the heritage.
Yes.
I had a chance to see and to taste both the pulp and chocolate made from 2 new varieties. They're called T800 and T801. What's really interesting is that this is the focus on this was primarily on flavor, right? But there's CCN-51 in the genetics, so it's a high productivity, really fine flavor cocoa bean. Which is really, for me, I think is going to, as farms age, the older trees are going to, the older CCN-51, we're now at 40, 50 years for some of these farms, and they're aging out, are going to be replaced by the T800 and the T801. And that new farms, rather than planting in CCN-51, are going to be planted in this new variety. And it could be a game changer, not just for Ecuadorian cocoa, but for cocoa anywhere.
Anywhere. Yeah, I do think they're doing a fantastic job. And I do think we need to be open to that. Again, the idea of all the time of thinking of vintage is the best or so on. No, we take the good from the past, which is the flavor that we had. We take that. That's not, and they're using it and they're making sure. But lowering cadmium or any heavy metal increase, it's already something that has shook all the craft industry. So we need to be open to that, and it helps everyone. It is the contrary, it helps the farmer, it helps the craft chocolate maker, it helps the consumer. So we do believe that we need to be open to that, and I'm very proud of our institute. The INEAP has done a fantastic job into looking into these new varieties, and nowadays considering the flavor. As you said before, it was just productivity because of the history of the witch's broom. Right now they're saying, we cannot lose flavor, so they're incorporating that into the breeding, and I think that's fantastic news for, at least all Ecuador.
for everyone. So we're getting very near the end. I want to do a real quick shout out. Thank you very much to Lena Lukumi, who says she's coming, connecting from the UK. We need part 2 of the conversation on climate change and CCN-51's impact on the Ecuadorian cocoa industry. So, Leila, at some point, if you're interested in doing that, we can certainly do a follow-up.
Absolutely.
Perhaps somebody from INEAP or somebody who has got more understanding from a solid research perspective and understanding.
Yes.
But
Well,
we can talk about that.
We did a little interview because I wanted to bring this to outside of Ecuador. We did an interview series, which we haven't launched, with the doctor, the head of the NIAP, which is a PhD in genetics and biology and everything, working already over 20 years in cocoa. And he explained a little bit of each one and why they're doing it. And I do think that is remarkable. So we're going to launch that.
Español? In Español?
In Spanish, yes. And that's my job is right now to make it in a video that it has translation and that we don't lose the translation. That's where.
Right. So when we do this next one, what I can do is I can take that video and I can embed it or link to it in the post, so that people will get a chance to be able to use it as a resource. Really great. Kurt says, I can't wait to try the new 800 and 801 beans.
Yes.
Absolutely, I can tell you that they will change your idea about what a high productivity cocoa can deliver in terms of flavor in the hands of a good chocolate maker. I just want to say. Now I want to we've got just a couple of minutes. Just want to say thanks to Mark. He's one of your customers. He likes working with you. So this is Blue Spruce Chocolate in Kittredge, Colorado. Yes. He's got a questions. We see you carry the Bolivian Rio Beni beans. How wide do you source this particular bean? And I'm going to jump in here and say, I've known Volker since like forever. It's been 16, 17 years now. And when Volker approached me about finding somebody in the United States to help handle his beans, I said, Lila is the person to do that and make that happen. And so I made the introduction. So these are going to be the beans from the Hacienda Tranquilidad. There are going to be a couple of different levels of them. So there's Hacienda Tranquilidad Superior, which could be very limited. I may take all of them because Volker has given me that option. But there's going to be ones which are just from the Tranquilidad, and there's going to be ones from the area around the Hacienda. So they'll carry different appellations and different price points for what's going on. But I'm responsible for doing that. So I'm very, very happy. And it's one of the reasons why it made sense to talk to Leila today after talking with Volker last week about that. But Mark has got a technical question, which is, can you detail how the cacao butter is processed? Do you have a central facility? And can you describe the process for deodorizing the butter?
Yes. Absolutely. Well, our deodorization is a little bit different from what Clay could see. By
the way, I have visited this facility in Duran, right, which is a suburb of Guayaquil. It's across the river from downtown Guayaquil, and so again, I've seen it. I can verify that all of this is on the up and up, and everything's being said, right? Anyway, with that, go ahead, Leila.
Well, you normally have the regular process, nibs, you grind them, you have the liquor. So that's the standard, you have, we also have our tweaks there, but we have then from liquor, what you do is we have first, we have a 12-pot hydraulic press. We have 2 of them where basically the liquor is going into chambers. And the chambers of those, they're like 12 different, perfect. You see those 12 different chambers there. And then what you do is you have, with hydraulic presses, you have a filter. The filters are what we call is like a fabric. So they're very, very fine filters on each of those plates. And it squeezes it during about 20 minutes. You have the pressing of those that's not the, you have the pressing of the.
I don't have a picture. I didn't publish a picture of the filters.
The press you have, that one that's not the press, that's a pre-grinder. So you have the squeezing of those. You see all those ones are the chambers, the ones that are in the middle, and then they're squeezed for 20 minutes, and the butter, which is going to be in a liquid state, is going to run out through pipes. And then what you're left on is a compact disc in the middle of each of those chambers. So you can imagine those discs are round, they're big, they're like 24 inches more or less big. And those discs go to a disc crusher, like that crashes those discs, because they're like compact powder, like compact
The
powder
big
from the
the
cup.
big disc the big disc get, the big disc gets what are called kibbled, broken
Yes,
up into smaller bits
yeah,
that look like dog food,
yeah.
right?
The disc,
And
exactly. It's called the cocoa cake. The
right,
cocoa
and
cake.
that gets run through this grinder, and powder is what comes out the other end,
Exactly.
right?
And that
But I
goes up
don't.
the lens, and it goes to the
Oh yeah.
pulverizer.
So there are the
Oh, that's
filters.
that's the filtering. That's afterwards. So after that, the butter runs down. If it's natural butter, then it's directly already putting in cooled down and made into boxes, into blocks, or kibbled. Kibbled is just you have a conveyor belt, and it drips the butter, and it starts making like a flat little layer of butter, and then it breaks off, and you get those kibbled pieces. Or if you have to go uh, through the deodorizer, after it's filtered here, it goes into the deodorizer. The deodorizer is a series, that's the one. It's a series of tanks, and you have a counter current of steam and hot cocoa butter. So basically, we don't use chemicals. We are, we try to keep it as natural, and as, because the beauty of cocoa butter is actually the crystallization, and it actually has, the vitamins E and so on, so that it actually is very shelf stable. If you have a cocoa butter that still has all the vitamins, and so it's actually, it lasts much longer than if you put chemicals in it, because it starts to get rancid easier. So once you have the counter steam, you have a steam taking most of the, and I say most because our butter is deodorized, but it's not 100% deodorized. If you bleach it and treat it with other chemicals, you can get to a point where it doesn't have any taste at all. Ours has a almost no taste, but there's still a little bit in there. That's because we make it in the natural way of steaming it. And once the steam comes, you have what we call a flash suction. So basically you have a
A
vacuum
vacuum. Yeah.
that absorbs immediately that steam, so that it creates, when you have a hot butter coming down, steam coming up, you have this effect of taking away most of the aromatics immediately. It's called the flash effect, and that is what creates the deodorized butter. So it's an not so easy way, but it's the most, I would say, the most natural, or the most forgiving, or you try to maintain the butter, the holiest way to maintain the butter if you want to have it deodorized. So that's
Yeah, and
our.
you're avoiding solvents like hexane and butane
Oh
and
yes,
things
we're
like that,
absolving
which are
solvents, we're
pretty icky.
bleaching,
Yeah.
we're not using any of that. And that is also why we can claim it. And the thing is, the industry can claim up to, I think it's 2% of solvent. That's the sad part. And they can still consider it deodorized butter, and they don't have to put it in there. But if you have a deodorized butter that is solvent treated or with other bleachers, you will still have a percentage there that is going to be in the product, even though you don't have to legally disclaim it. So we avoid that. That's what I like about having studied chemical engineering, is we try to avoid everything that has to do
Right.
with chemicals.
Right. And I understand your father is also a mechanical engineer.
Yes,
And
my
so this
father.
particular deodorizer is, you bought something and you said, let's completely rework it in
We
order to
redid
make it work
it
the way we,
completely.
yeah.
Yes,
Right.
completely. And
So to answer the last question, yes, Cocoa Supply does have a central facility.
yes,
And I just want to let everybody know that the pictures that I showed
yeah.
came from a post that I did last year,
Hmm.
because I did a live on this. And you can go and you can see it. It's downscaling chocolate production case study. The link to it is embedded in this story, this post. So if you go to this post, and you can go to this link, and you can get to that case study. So you
Yes.
can learn more about this whole process when
Mhm.
you get there. And with that, Lila, man, the hour has gone by. I
Yes.
want to point everybody. This is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. You can go there and see what's going on. This show is sponsored by the members of TheChocolateLife.com. If you'd like to be a sponsor of The Chocolate Life, go become a member today. I appreciate it. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, share, comment, hit the little bell so you get notifications, all those wonderful things that drive the algorithm and help spread the word about what it is we're doing. I also want to thank people who connected on LinkedIn and Facebook today. And with that, Leila, we're a little long. I hope you don't mind, but a closing remark? A closing remark?
Well, again, thank you so much for having me, Clay. It's always a pleasure. I love what you're bringing also to the public, making sure that everyone knows. I do believe that, again, information is key. And I do like when everyone gets together and shares, I think, again, I always promote the craft community. I was like, we're so little compared to the big guys. Yes. We can stick together and make it even bigger.
I appreciate that. And I just want to do a quick shout out to Mark. Thanks for the information about the technique and describing how it's going on, how you do your cocoa butter manufacturing and the deodorization and filtering for the deodorized butter. And then also to Kurt, thanks for bringing Leila to us. It's a pleasure. I can tell you that one of the sadnesses about my moving from New York City to Arizona is that when I lived in New York City, I could literally, catch a train and be to Industry City and you go visit Leila, half an hour, 40 minutes or something like that on the train. And now it's a lot more complicated. And so,
we met each other right before you moved. So it was really, but good enough.
We'll make it work. But, the whole idea for doing the Chocolate Life Live grew out of Clubhouse. Mm-hmm. And so how is it when we are separated physically and we can't meet each other in person, even if we couldn't because we're separated by geography, so long distances. So we have people from Ecuador and we have people from the United Kingdom today, a couple of people from Canada. So it's a wide audience. The whole idea of this is, how do we stay together as a community, share what it is that we know, meet new people, all those kinds of things. And, this twice a week that I'm doing here on the Chocolate Life Live is one of the ways that I keep in touch with people around the world. And I'm privileged to have the opportunity to do so. And with that, I want to end today's live stream, as I always do, by reminding people, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Ciao, until next time. There's not going to be a live stream this coming Tuesday. I'm involved in a webinar, which conflicts in terms of time, but I will be doing something for this coming Friday. And Leila, listen, I hope you have all these people coming and joining the open studio this weekend and seeing what it is you're doing. Just, personally, I'm interested in hearing what you have to share afterwards.
Absolutely. All right? This experiment. Okay. Thank you so much, Clay. Thank you everyone for logging in. Thank you.
Yeah, and please tell Lou, thank you very much. All right.
Thank you. Okay. Sure. No problem.
Everyone.